Letty is a legendary red dragon who is very cowardly, shy, kind-hearted, and a little dumb. But his life changed when he met the demon lord and decided to build him a house, not realizing he'd have to pay taxes on it. The story begins when Letty's dad left him to watch over an egg containing his brother, but he fell asleep, and thieves snuck in and stole it. When his dad found out, he kicked him out of the house and threw him out into the world alone, without any help, telling him to either come back with the egg or be disowned. Letty, who had never relied on himself before, found himself lost and alone in a mysterious world. After reading about 3 ghouls who know how to build houses, he decided to look for them and ask them to build him a home where he could live and be safe from this dangerous world. But some hunters kidnap him and take him to a mine called Zoloto. He sits there crying about what happened to him, saying he doesn't want to get hurt and that all he wants is a house. The hunters offered to build him a house in exchange for his organs. Letty refused the offer, laughed at the hunters, and escaped. The dwarves chase Letty as he makes a run for it, but he soon stumbles upon some adventurers. Now he's trapped between the dwarves and the adventurers. After a not-so-great battle, Letty manages to escape, glad to be alive. Feeling frustrated and scared, Letty starts crying. Just then, some harpies approach and ask him what's wrong. They're surprised to see a crying dragon but show him some compassion anyway. After hearing his story, the harpies offer him a home in their large nests. Letty is surprised, but also relieved. However, when they point to their home, high up in the trees, Letty feels distressed because he hasn't unlocked his ability to fly. He decides to give it a try anyway. Spreading his wings wide, Letty takes to the sky. He feels delighted that he's flying, and even the harpies are in awe. But his joy is short-lived when he comes crashing down, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. The harpies are puzzled by this. Since Letty can't get up to their nest, they decide to refer him to the goblin village for help, pointing him in the right direction. Upon reaching the goblin village, however, Letty finds himself in trouble again as the goblins celebrate their rare catch. Seeing the hopelessly struggling excuse for a dragon, the goblin chief asks about his situation. When they hear the harpies sent him, the goblins are overjoyed and decide to help Letty for the harpies' sake. They decide Letty can't stay with them, and after giving him some advice to be more confident, they recommend another location. Letty makes his way to a river habitat, but soon finds that he's not compatible with the water either. He is then told to find a certain elf architect in the far east. Deep in the eastern forest, he will find a capable architect named Diria who can build him a suitable home. Hearing this, Letty expresses his gratitude and heads east. Walking through the eastern forest, Letty searches for the architect. He asks around, gets pointed in the right direction, and continues his journey alone. Letty finally stumbles upon the large tree in the eastern forest that was described to him. Just as he decides he's reached the right spot, a group of unruly adventurers challenges him, hoping to claim a dragon's head for their own glory. However, Letty's anticlimactic stance ruins their glorious mood. Undeterred, they keep bullying the useless dragon. But thankfully, a white-haired elf appears just in time to see what's happening. Appalled to see the weak dragon being bullied, the elf opens his spellbook and casts a fire spell that burns the adventurers to a crisp. After checking on Letty, Diria asks about his situation, but Letty is too mortified to speak clearly. And that's how the sorry excuse for a dragon who couldn't even guard an egg began his house hunting adventures with the elf. Letty has a pleasant dream about beautiful homes, but it turns into a nightmare as soon as he opens a door. The red dragon wakes up screaming, but stops when he hears a strange voice. He looks over and sees the elf who saved him earlier. Remembering the scary scene, Letty hides behind a tree, away from the intimidating elf. Once comfortable, Letty explains his situation, telling the stranger he's looking for a certain architect elf. Hearing this, Diria finds it coincidental and introduces himself. Letty takes a moment to process this, and when he finally understands, he begs Diria to help him find a home. Happy to help, Diria, a licensed expert in the field, tells him his options. He hands Letty his card, and the dragon discovers Diria is also a demon lord. He can't help but think the elf is pretty cool. Diria gets down to business, asking what kind of home Letty wants. After Letty describes his preferences, Diria explains the dangers, saying he'll need a bigger home to deter adventurers. Diria proposes that the ideal home for a dragon is a dungeon. He casts a teleportation spell, transporting them to a majestic home for a tour. Letty is amazed by Diria's spell, and they head inside. Letty comments that the house is too big for him, but Diria assures him it's a fitting home for a dragon. Inside, Letty is smitten by the structure's majesty. Just then, Diria warns him to watch his step, but it's too late. The clumsy dragon steps on a trap and falls into a hole. Diria explains that the structure is built this way to stop intruders. He motions for Letty to continue, but the dragon is skeptical about the traps. Diria reassures him, saying he specializes in resurrection magic. This doesn't reassure Letty at all, and sure enough, he falls into another trap when opening a door. As they descend, Diria explains how some mechanisms work. Letty tries to activate one but does it wrong, falling into yet another trap. He starts to fear the structure and tries to be careful, but he keeps falling into traps. They finally reach the lower floors, but Letty is covered in bruises. He asks for a break, and the calm elf agrees. He shows Letty a healing pool, and the dragon immediately gets in. Letty points out that adventurers could also use the pool. Diria explains it has sensors to detect and flush away intruders. Just then, the pool activates, flushing the dragon into its depths. Thankfully, Diria uses his magic to bring him back. Diria concludes the tour and says they should head back to the first floor. When Letty starts climbing the walls with his claws, Diria looks on, puzzled, but wrongly assumes flying would be inelegant. The useless dragon agrees, hiding his inability to fly. Just then, a group of adventurers enters the dungeon. They spot the large red dragon climbing the walls and decide to attack. Diria steps in, telling them to leave. The adventurers are not deterred and attack him. When they see their attacks have no effect, they become alarmed. Diria retaliates with a magic spell, but despite the ruckus, Letty keeps climbing without looking down. He finally makes it out and finds Diria waiting. When the elf asks if he wants the house, Letty flatly declines. Later, walking through the forest, Letty rubs his sore muscles. He tells Diria he doesn't want any more houses with traps. Diria assures him their next stop is more ideal, a place heroes will never go and where Letty will never be lonely. Letty is excited, but Diria informs him the house might need renovations. Letty is fine with this, but when they arrive, he is mortified to see a haunted house. He asks if it's really haunted, and the elf confirms it is. The scared dragon tries to walk away, but Diria drags him by the tail into the house. Inside, Letty is creeped out, but stays close to Diria. Diria's usual reassurances don't soothe the dragon. He shows Letty to his room for the night. After giving him some useless items, Diria leaves, assuring him he'll be in the next room. As he's about to leave, Diria returns with healing items, startling the cowardly dragon. That night, Letty can't sleep because of strange noises. When he gets up to check, a ghost appears, scaring him to death. He rushes out to find the elf, but the other rooms have vanished. Letty finds himself in a long, dark hallway, tailed by a ghost. The ghost suddenly appears in front of him, and the coward screams. He can't continue because it's too dark, but then a ghost hands him a torch. Not thinking, Letty accepts it and goes deeper into the hallway. He gets even more creeped out when he sees a bloodied door in his bath. Stuck between the door and a group of ghosts, Letty is too scared to go back and decides to go through the door. He is met by the sight of another ghost, which is too much for him, and he faints from fright. When he wakes up, Letty sees a group of wraiths hovering over him and faints again. Seeing this, Diria tells his ghost friend that the welcome might have been too much. Hearing this, Letty expresses his shock. Diria introduces his ghost friend, explaining their plan to welcome him. The ghost friend recalls a time when Diria also traveled with a dragon companion. After the explanation, Diria asks if Letty still wants to live there, but our cowardly friend politely declines, saddening the eager ghosts. They say their goodbyes, and Letty leaves with Diria for the next house. That night, as they camp outside, Letty still can't sleep, recalling how scary the wraiths were. The next morning, as Diria and Letty head to the next property, Diria says he needs to make a quick stop. When Letty hears their destination, the coward hides in the bushes, scared of where they're going. The calm elf reassures him, explaining he wants to return the giant bed they rented for him on their last house tour. Remembering the huge bed, Letty wonders how Diria is carrying it. Diria explains to the clueless red dragon that the bed is in a satchel, a common item for adventurers. They arrive at a showroom that's been in business for 1,000 years. Suddenly, a group of scary old ladies appears from the shadows and grabs Letty's wing. Letty hides behind Diria, who introduces him to the Greyeye sisters, the shop owners and his frequent customers. After getting to know the young dragon, the scary-looking ladies lead them into their showroom. Letty is amazed by the incredible sight. They show him doors of different sizes and magic doorknobs that open to various locations. Letty tries one knob and finds himself looking at the group of dwarves who captured him before. He quickly shuts the door. The Grey sisters then show him a strange door with a beautiful lady guarding it. Diria explains the door only opens with a magic word. If he doesn't say it in time, the lady will read an embarrassing poem about him. Time runs out, and the lady starts reading a very embarrassing poem. Unable to take it, Letty yells for her to stop. Feeling depressed that he can't find anything he likes, the young dragon spots a wonderful light coming from a small cage. Diria warns him to stay back, but Letty ignores him. He finds a strange salamander in the cage, but when he puts his finger near it, the salamander gives him a terrible bite. The Grey sisters explain that the light-emitting creatures are prisoners, serving sentences, and providing light. Diria then leads him to a piece of furniture he might like. Seeing the wonderful fireplace, Letty is amazed and has many fantasies about it. The Grey sisters wonder what kind of dragon he is. They tell him the item is high quality, but so heavy that a house couldn't support it. This gives Diria an idea: build a house instead. The Grey sisters discourage it, saying it would be too expensive for Letty. When Diria asks Letty if he wants to build a house, the useless red dragon is so amazed by the idea that he faints. Diria takes Letty to an abandoned plot of land, and Letty is impressed by its size. He worries he can't afford to build on it. Diria jokes about selling an organ, which alarms the young dragon. He asks how much money Letty has, and the red dragon shows the elf his baby tooth. He tells the elf he hoped a fairy would turn it into money, but Diria shatters that dream, making Letty depressed again. However, Diria comforts him, saying even his baby tooth is worth a good amount. He then shows Letty the architectural design he prepared. Calling his workers, who are gnomes and ogres, Diria gets ready to start. He explains to the scared dragon that the magical beasts are his workers and orders them to begin construction. Wandering the construction site, Letty feels useless and asks Diria if he can help. Seeing his restlessness, Diria tells him to help the gnomes fireproof the materials. Letty is happy, but the gnomes get mad and beat him up for messing up their work. Feeling useless, he goes back to Diria and helps make plaster. But even this is too much for him. He accidentally sneezes into the mix, getting plaster on his face. Diria gives him a towel and tells him not to rush, which the dragon appreciates. After several days of hard work, the house is finally finished, and Letty is overjoyed. But Diria bursts his bubble, saying they have to wait for adventurers to arrive to cover the construction costs. Letty gets depressed again. The elf reassures him and gives him some tough-looking monsters as bodyguards. The monsters look scary but seem thrilled to be a dragon's bodyguards. Diria says goodbye, promising to visit, and Letty thanks him for his help. Settling into his new home, Letty decides to take a cool bath. Meanwhile, the same adventurers who attacked him before show up, declaring his house a new dungeon to conquer. They soon run into Letty's unfriendly bodyguard. Letty hears fighting and men screaming and goes to check. In the hallway, he sees the mess from the fight. The adventurers are still alive and, seeing Letty, remember what happened in the eastern forest. They drop their gear and run for their lives, vowing revenge. The bodyguards are in awe, thinking the dragon's presence scared the adventurers away. But Letty can't handle the pressure. The next morning, they tell him he has visitors. Letty finds two little people waiting. They ask for his protection, calling him the Flame Dragon and wanting his strength to shield them from adventurers. Letty realizes the title must have come from the adventurers he defeated and agrees to take them in. His bodyguard then informs him that others are waiting for his protection too. He gains more underlings, and over the next few days, Letty endures constant battles between adventurers and monsters. More monsters are drawn to him, and his house becomes a top-ranked dungeon. This is all too much for him, and one day, Letty leaves a note for Diria and runs away. Reading the note, the elf realizes what happened and quickly goes to find him. It doesn't take long. The two sit under a tree to talk. Letty explains he's overwhelmed and just wants a peaceful place to live. Diria reassures him, saying he'll find Letty a home, even if it takes 100 years. Letty worries about troubling the elf, but Diria says he's done it before for another dragon, and 100 years is nothing for his long lifespan. He reassures Letty, and the two set off on another journey to find him a new home. Feeling rather cold, Letty finds himself in an icy landscape with his elf partner, Diria, on their search for a new home. Complaining about the cold, Diria decides to find him a suitable winter wear. After trying out a series of items, Letty finally finds the ideal winter wear, covering himself. They get back down to business, and Diria informs him that this piece of land would be perfect for him as there are no heroes or adventures in these parts. Handing him a shovel, Diria informs Letty that he will be building his home by himself. The snowy parts are home to some magic beasts called Yeti. They are the locals of these extreme regions who spend their lives hunting for food and roaming the snowy lands. They are a nomadic bunch who move about to feed their young, hence they don't have a permanent residence. They also build igloos for themselves as shelter from the cold. After analyzing these creatures, Diria informs Letty that he will be building a similar home as the Yeti. After informing him of the cost-effectiveness and affordability of the lad, Diria urges Letty to begin work, but Letty only feels some sketchiness in his words. Diria then shows him how to build the igloo, and the young dragon gets to work. Diria also shows him the structure of his home, informing him that it will have 3 levels, each level a step higher than the next. Letty diligently follows all of the elf's instructions, and when Diria finally returns to check on him, Letty has already completed the house. Diria applauds him but tells him that the difficult part is yet to come. He tells Letty that the area is isolated, so he will need to learn how to survive on his own. He instructs him to survive for 3 days while he's away, telling him to try his best not to die and to build some character. After wishing him good luck, Diria casts a teleportation spell and disappears, much to Letty's dismay. Feeling depressed, Letty decides to go fetch some firewood. He makes his way into the forest and gathers some figs. However, just then, he spots some deer and decides to try his hands at hunting. Unfortunately, he is too large and very easy to spot by the deers. The sorry excuse for a dragon then finds himself being chased down by the deers instead of the other way around. Deciding to try something simpler, he decides to chase down some rabbits. However, he ends up in the same fate. He moves on to some wolves, but before he can do anything, Letty gets himself stuck in the snow. He gets depressed again, noting that he has never hunted before, which is why he's so terrible. Letty then decides to head home, but thanks to the blizzard, he's unable to find his way back. Suddenly, he notices a presence behind him, and turning around in fright, Letty sees a yeti. He tries to run, but the yeti holds onto him, pointing him in the direction of an igloo. Following him in, Letty sees a rather well-furnished space. He also sees Diria by the stove, preparing a meal. He feels rather relieved and takes off his winter wear, feeling the heat. Then he notices that the place is getting hotter, and even Diria isn't wearing any shirt thanks to the heat. The temperature starts rising even more, and even the yeti's fur is taken off. As if things aren't weird enough, Letty sees a group of dwarves and a bunch of adventurers heading toward him. The igloo starts melting as the temperature reaches an all-time high, and the whole place comes crashing down. Jumping out from beneath the snow, he realizes that he has been dreaming all along. He makes his way over to the ocean, feeling lost and hungry. As he's wondering what to do, he spots an egg in front of him and can't help but fantasize about eating a delicious meal. However, his guilt at losing an egg in the past won't make him eat the egg, and he decides to leave the unfertilized egg untouched. Turning around to head home, the unfortunate dragon realizes that has drifted off the mainland and is now stuck on an isolated iceberg, along with the egg. Just then, the egg almost falls into the water, but Letty moves in time to catch it. However, after one day passes by, Letty's hunger gets the better of him and he starts to fantasize about eating the egg. Quickly coming back to his senses, he stops himself in time. But just then, a huge sea creature appears and swallows him up with the egg, iceberg and all. Waking up, Letty finds himself looking up at a fish man. The man introduces himself as Debbie Jones and Letty does likewise, getting acquainted with the man. Suddenly, his memories kick in and he recalls all his ordeals right up until the moment he got swallowed up. Jones confirms that they are still inside the belly of the whale, and Letty protests about his ordeals, afraid of being digested. However, Jones snaps at him, telling him to calm down. He urges Letty to follow him, taking him to the inner recesses of his home. Jones takes him deeper into the belly of the whale and Letty is amazed to see how well furnished it is. Seeing how well settled Jones is inside the whale, he questions how he got all the ingredients and furniture he's using, and Jones explains that the whale had swallowed them all. He helps Letty get comfortable, and the red dragon explains to Jones about everything he has faced so far. Jones then decides to help the troubled dragon get comfortable, showing him around. He takes him to a laundry room, showing Letty how things work, and then Jones shows him where he dries his clothes. He then takes him to the place where the whale's oil is collected for making soap, and where all the fish swallowed by the whale goes. After settling down for a meal, Jones shows Letty to the hot springs, telling him to stay as long as he likes. That night, Letty settles down to have some sleep, thankful that Jones is rather nice. He wakes up in the middle of the night to take a leak, only to find Jones sharpening his knife. Letty's imagination runs wild, thinking Jones wants to use him as a sacrifice to the whale. However, his worries are unfounded as Jones shows him his friendly side once again. He shows him to the bathroom, and they later settle down to have a chat. Letty tells him that he would like to go back to the surface, and Jones explains that he can leave through the whale's blowhole whenever he likes. After making some preparations, he straps Letty to a chair and uses some paper to make the whale sneeze out the cowardly red dragon. Letty is now back on the surface again, however, he's in the exact same predicament as he was before. He's starting to feel hungry again, tempted to eat the whale. But thankfully, a seal appears before him. Letty is happy, relieved that he has finally found some food. However, he isn't able to bring himself to eat the cute creature. Surprisingly, the seal turns into Diria much to his surprise. The elf explains to him that he has been watching Letty and based on his observations, Letty is too kind to activate any survival instincts. Hence, life out there is too much for him. They make their way back home and Letty explains where he found the egg. Diria is fascinated, but Letty gets mortified when he sees the elf about to dump the egg in a pot of boiling water. Alarmed, Letty stops him in time, but just then, the egg hatches, showing a white creature who thinks Letty is his father. Diria and the half-wit dragon, Letty, along with the newborn chick wrapped around him, appear in another region and decide to explore it. Letty comments about the weather, expressing his preference for warm places over cold climates. Hearing this, Diria asks if he is fine with abandoning the igloo he built by himself. Letty replies, yes, mentioning that the Yetis were glad to take it off his claws. For their next property, Diria looks into a list and says he believes Letty will fare well in a communal living arrangement. He plans to reach out to a few landlords he is acquainted with. However, he sarcastically mentions that these communities are oriented toward bachelors, making fun of Letty as the new chick calls him Papa. Diria turns to Letty and gives him flowers and a gift to celebrate the birth of his firstborn. Diria then carries the chick in his hands, asking what kind of home it would like to share with its papa. He stares at the confused Letty, who is still in denial, and explains that when a creature is born, it imprints onto the first person it sees, making it nearly impossible to reverse the effects of imprinting. However, Letty still seems unsure about raising the chick. To reassure him, Diria tells a story related to his situation. He talks about a human explorer who came across a gigantic egg, from which hatched a monstrous bird. The bird, believing the human was its mother, began to follow him everywhere. Despite the explorer's countless attempts to return the bird, it was determined to stay with him. Eventually, the explorer decided to raise it, and the bird lived alongside him, believing it too was human. Unfortunately, the bird didn't understand that humans have short lives. When the explorer died, the bird stayed with the corpse, and, even now, it still cries out for the explorer as its father. Hearing this story, the cowardly dragon can't help but feel scared. Diria further explains that once the chick has imprinted on someone, it cannot be returned to its parents. He reveals that the chick is a creature called Raisvelger and will grow up fine without Letty's intervention, as they feed on snow and can survive on their own. Letty points out that there isn't any snow around, prompting Diria to cast a spell that transports them to a snowy land where they can gather snow for the chick. Despite this, Letty, still cowardly, worries that he will somehow mess up taking care of the chick. To address this, Diria uses his teleportation magic to take them to a housing community in search of a more suitable parent to raise the chick. Letty is amazed by the structures and all the surroundings as Diria tells him about communal living and how it would be a great place for the chick. However, Diria mentions that most units aren't designed to house larger creatures, being more suited for small to mid-sized beings. Letty then asks if heroes come to raid here too. And just at that moment, a couple of heroes appear but are swiftly dealt with by a giant magical beast, who turns out to be the landlord. They visit the first landlord, two creatures living together, hoping they could be the adoptive parents of the chick. As the two creatures discuss among themselves what decision to make, Letty asks Diria if they are a couple. Diria explains that they are not, they simply have differing tastes, making it hard for them to find romantic partners, so they pretend to be married to make up for that. One of the brothers mentions they've had issues with a tenant, complaining about someone's loud kids. The other brother suggests that it shouldn't be loud since it just hatched. Just then, the chick lets out a loud noise, breaking the picture frame on the wall, and causing one of the brothers to faint from the shock. Letty and Diria move on to the next landlord, who happens to be an animal lover. As she is about to take the chick in, Lamai, another woman, intervenes, arguing that their residents always complain about their unit smelling like a zoo. This starts a fight, and they begin to nag each other. Unable to reach a conclusion, Letty and Diria decide to speak to someone else. They meet a manticore, who agrees to take the little one in and introduces him to his children, who start playing with the chick. While Letty is initially glad the chick has finally found a home, he suddenly sees the manticore's children about to tear the chick apart as prey. Letty quickly yanks the chick away from them and walks off. As they are pondering where to go next, Letty hears a voice calling out to him. He looks around, but doesn't see anyone. The voice calls out again, telling him to look down. Letty then sees two little people and recognizes them as the Korpiker he had encountered before. He explains to them that he is looking for an adoptive parent for the chick. They offer to help and ask him to wait a moment, as they need to deliver a wildfowl they hunted. Upon hearing this, Letty, fearful for the chick's safety, quickly runs off. Continuing their search, Letty and Diria meet another potential landlord, a muscular beast who exudes an air of authority. The beast inspects the chick and decides to take a strict approach, attempting to whip the chick into shape. Alarmed by this harsh method, Letty immediately intervenes, stopping the beast and deciding against leaving the chick in his care. Letty and Diria, resting from the day's search for adoptive parents, start to reflect on their efforts. Letty whines regretfully, wondering if perhaps the chick's parents would have come back for it if he had left it alone. Diria replies that if he had left it, some other creature would have eaten it. He then suggests that Letty should raise the chick himself. However, Letty, still insecure, says that he is a weak, cowardly dragon and probably won't be able to protect it. Diria encourages him, explaining that strength and bravery aren't the only qualities that make a good father. Just then, a bear appears with its two children. The bear tells Diria that he has been thinking of renovating his building. Diria excuses himself and follows the bear to go check it out, leaving Letty alone with the bear's children. The bear cubs tell Letty that they know he is looking for an adoptive parent for the chick because everyone is talking about it. Just then, a monster with blinding bangs appears, forcefully demanding Letty to give him the chick, claiming it would fetch a nice sum of money. Letty, trembling with fear, refuses, fretting over the safety of the chick. The villain shifts his attention to the bear cubs, and Letty, still cowardly, threatens to breathe fire on him if he touches them. But the villain isn't intimidated. He charges towards Letty to attack, and in a desperate attempt to defend himself and the cubs, Letty breathes out fire. However, the incompetent dragon burns his own tongue, leaving him weakened, but still manages to instill fear in the villain. Just as the situation seems dire, Diria appears and intensifies the villain's fear by spinning false tales of Letty being the flame dragon lord. This causes the villain to flee in terror. Diria pats Letty on the back and commends him for risking his life to protect the kids. Letty, still catching his breath, realizes he hasn't yet given the chick a name. Without much hesitation, he decides on Pip. Letty whines about how he has spent all his saved money on food, cold medicine, and a bunch of snow, all for Pip, leaving him completely broke. Diria decides they should spend the day hunting for jobs. Opening his magic book, Diria teleports them to the market. Letty is nervous to see so many humans, but Diria assures him that this free city doesn't persecute anyone based on species or nationality, and beings of all kinds come here to trade. Despite this reassurance, Letty's cowardice manifests and intensifies, and he tries to run, but Diria grabs him before he can escape. Diria further explains that combat and theft are prohibited in the marketplace, and there's nothing to fear. If people break the rules, they are jailed. Continuing their job hunt, Letty and Diria meet an eagle who insists on a letter of introduction for Letty to secure a job. Just then, Pip intervenes, communicating with the eagle and persuading him to make an exception for Letty, vouching for his strength. Grateful for the opportunity, Diria asks the eagle to assign Letty a simple task. Letty is tasked with cutting down blocks for trees and buildings. Despite his hard work, Letty struggles to earn enough to feed Pip. Seeing Letty's plight, the eagle resolves to find him a better paying job. Letty tries his hand as a hotel receptionist, but his appearance frightens away the visitors, leaving him feeling disheartened. He expresses his frustration to Diria, who suggests they explore other options. Diria's idea of Letty providing a proxy service sparks hope, especially when they meet Robert, an apprentice mage in need of Letty's unique abilities. Excited by the prospect of impressing his friends, Robert explains his predicament to Letty and Diria. He needs Letty to pretend he summoned him, boasting to his friends about his summoning prowess. Letty, though apprehensive, agrees to the plan, hoping this job will finally bring them some success in their journey. Robert appears in front of his friends, fully prepared to impress them. He pretends to summon Letty as they planned, expecting his friends to be amazed, or at least impressed. However, his friends seem unimpressed and even doubt him, jokingly asking if there's a zipper on Letty's back. Feeling embarrassed and desperate to salvage the situation, Robert unexpectedly pretends to summon Letty to attack his friends, deviating from their original plan. Letty, bewildered and unsure of what to do, stands there looking fearful, stupid, and clueless. Witnessing Letty's distress, Pip decides to intervene. With a troubled expression, Pip lets out a loud scream, causing everyone, including Robert and his friends, to lose consciousness. As Letty recovers from the surprise, Pip communicates something to Diria, who understands his language. Diria interprets Pip's message for Letty, informing him that Pip believes Letty is too powerful and strong to bother with weaklings like Robert and his friends. Letty earns a considerable sum from the proxy service job, prompting him and Diria to return to the eagle, inquiring if there is any work specifically suited for a dragon. The eagle mentions an individual in need of a dragon for a dragon test. Letty finds himself in a precarious situation, tied tightly with chains as he foolishly puts his life on the line to see if a magician's spell would work. Meanwhile, Diria carries Pip, waiting for Letty's return. Lilith, an acquaintance from the past, approaches Diria and tries to catch up on old times. Upon hearing Letty's cries, she questions Diria if he won't intervene and help Letty. Diria calmly responds, explaining that he has cast a spell on Letty to increase his magic defense, ensuring his safety. Lilith stares at Diria admirably, noting the change in him since the days when he became the Dark Lord. Diria recounts the day he became the Dark Lord as the most unlucky day of his entire life. He describes how he tried to relinquish the title when they selected him by lottery, considering it a great mistake. As he had only come to pick up a book, he ordered. Lilith approaches him during the conversation, offering to tell him about the future of his reign, as she is a fortune teller. However, Diria declines, stating that he has no intention of having a reign. During the inauguration of the Dark Lord, Diria disappears, leaving a note implying that he quit. Despite efforts to find him, all attempts prove futile. Diria walks around the tower, activating anti-intruder spells, and ultimately leaves. Lilith adds that they eventually let him leave after begging him to handle a small bit of Dark Lord paperwork. Diria debunks this, stating he would never bother himself with such affairs. He decides to take his leave upon hearing Letty's screams. Letty cries, fearing he has become a nice cut of roast dragon meat due to the magician's spell. But Diria reassures him that he is okay. Trusting Diria, Letty opens his eyes and sees that he's unharmed. Feeling relieved and thinking he must have leveled up in some way. As they hand over his pay, Letty and Diria agree it's enough to build him a house and live comfortably. Diria excuses himself to purchase supplies for their continued journey and asks Letty to wash at the well in the market square. After finishing washing himself, a man approaches Letty and asks him to take a few things over to his hut on the outskirts of town. Initially hesitant, Letty declines, but carelessly agrees when the man offers to pay him. Meanwhile, Lilith had warned Diria earlier that humans were gathering outside of town upon hearing about the dragon, Letty, and was hoping to capture him. She asks him to be careful and vigilant. At the outskirts, Letty encounters a couple of men armed with swords, clearly ready to attack him. Despite the obvious danger, Letty remains an incompetent fool and idiotically informs them that he has a delivery to make. The men instruct him to drop the delivery in a cage behind the car. Oblivious to the trap, Letty complies, but as soon as he does, he is pulled into the car, which then drives away. Captured and imprisoned, Letty feels a surge of fear as he clutches Pip close. He suggests Pip escape through the bars to freedom, but Pip refuses, trying to break the cage instead. Inspired by Pip's determination, Letty joins in but loses a tooth in the process. Suddenly, a voice commands silence. Letty turns to see two intimidating red eyes staring back at him, sending a shiver down his spine. The creature reveals himself to be Steve, who is also a prisoner. Upon noticing Pip, Steve asks if he's hungry, and Letty pleads with him to help them escape. Without hesitation, Steve casually steps out and opens the door for them to come out and meet the others. Expecting to meet mean people, Letty is surprised to find a group of nice individuals. He meets a little dog named Daniel, the three skeleton bosses, and the stunning Cassandra Madonna. Steve mentions there are too many others to name. Later, Letty asks Steve if he and the others have ever tried to escape. Steve replies, no, explaining that the dungeon is part of a fighting arena owned by a human Margrave. He describes it as pretty chill, with no hunters dropping by. Although heroes sometimes barge in, the jailers handle them, and life is easier inside because they're allowed to do what they want and are even provided with food. Nervously objecting, Letty expresses fear that something bad might eventually happen to them. Steve dismisses his concerns, suggesting that Letty's perception might change once he sees the rest of the place. He decides to give Letty a tour, showing him the huge bath where hygiene isn't a worry, the gym, and the art theater. Amazed by what he sees, Letty soon remarks that it all seems designed to prevent them from escaping, especially since their rooms resemble cells. Steve then shows Letty Cassandra's grand room and mentions that if Letty wants to change his room, he totally can. At the end of the dungeon tour, Steve asks Letty if he wants to customize his room, assuring him that the jailers can provide whatever materials he needs. As they walk back, Letty sees the jailers playing cards with the prisoners and is shocked to realize they've been there the whole time. Just then, a bell rings, and one of the jailers announces it's time for the first round battle between the skeleton and the dragon. Clueless about what this means, Letty looks to Steve, who reminds him that the place is an arena. At the arena, Letty faces the skeletons in battle. Initially, he is nervous and anxious, unable to breathe fire. However, after a while, he flaps his wings and tail, effortlessly blowing the skeletons away. Later, he checks on the skeletons, asking if they are okay. He is relieved and glad to see that they are fine, as they can always put themselves back together and it's all part of the script. Steve reveals that the arena battles happen every 3 days, with the show based on betting odds to ensure the house makes a profit. After the battle, Letty returns to his cage to find Pip but can't locate him. With the help of the jailers, he discovers Pip in Cassandra's ice room. The jailer explains he saw Pip in the drainage ditch, fished him out, and placed him in the ice room. Letty then thanks the jailer for saving Pip's life. As Letty goes to bed, he wonders what Diria is up to and if he is looking for him. Meanwhile, Diria is actually busy arm wrestling with 13 contenders, not searching for Letty in the slightest. 10 days have passed since Letty's arrival at the arena. Steve walks up to Letty, commending him for the work done today, noting that the crowd has grown larger since he started. Letty, standing there and freaking out, wonders where Diria is. He snaps out of it when Pip calls out for him from Cassandra's arms. She hands Pip over to him, and Letty thanks her for helping. The jailers enter, bringing grim news. The Margrave is dead, and his eldest son, who has inherited the estate, wants to shut down the arena and euthanize all the creatures inside. Letty freaks out again at the thought. Steve nervously asks if it's his fault, suspecting the son discovered his pilfering of profits to build a rotating theater. Daniel wonders if it's because they fudged the numbers in their favor to buy supplies, while Cassandra questions if it's due to them using the money for vacations. The jailers explain that it's not about those infractions. The new Margrave doesn't want them taking revenge for being captured and enslaved. Letty expresses surprise, realizing the guards were in on it. Steve explains that they were enslaved by the Margrave, and they scammed the system as a form of retribution. The jailers add that they've learned from the new Margrave's mercenaries that once the human employees have been evacuated, the mercs will head in to start killing the creatures. This sends a renewed wave of panic through Letty, who desperately wonders how they can escape this dire situation. Letty, in a panic, asks Steve how they are going to escape. Steve explains that they plan to use an ancient aqueduct that runs beneath the entire arena and connects to an old decrepit well outside the walls. Daniel adds that they need a team to distract the humans, and Letty is included in the plan. Letty tries to exclude himself, cowardly freaking out, but Daniel tells him to trust his friends. Cassandra also reminds him that he has Pip to protect. Hearing this, Letty reluctantly agrees. They successfully deceive the guards with a decoy and watch them from their hiding spot. Steve instructs Letty to sneak around in a cardboard box with a dungeon brick wall on one side to blend in. The plan is to use an explicit magazine as bait, and then knock out the soldiers when they take it. However, the plan goes awry. Letty, in his nervousness, blindly chases the soldiers to a dead end and reveals himself. More soldiers spot him and prepare to attack. Just then, Pip lets out a loud scream, and Daniel jumps down, scaring the soldiers, and causing them to retreat. Cassandra, meanwhile, uses her riddles to trick her enemies into fighting each other. Steve uses Letty as bait to lure some of the soldiers into cages. Amid the chaos, the group manages to make their way to the aqueduct. Letty, still nervous but determined, realizes that with the help of his friends, they might just be able to escape this ordeal. Thinking everyone must have escaped by now, as they have bought enough time, Letty and his group attempt to make their own escape. However, they find themselves surrounded by soldiers. Just when all hope seems lost, Diria appears, casting a powerful spell that causes the soldiers to fall into a deep sleep, saving the group in the nick of time. Letty, overwhelmed with relief and emotion, tearfully approaches Diria. He asks if Diria has been looking for him the whole time. Diria, maintaining his calm and emotionless demeanor, replies that he heard Letty was in the arena, but decided to let him handle his own problems to see if he could manage on his own. Despite his stoic front, there's a hint of pride in Diria's eyes as he sees Letty safe and sound. Diria then introduces himself to the rest of the group. Before they make their final escape, Diria decides to take a precautionary measure. He casts a spell to erase the memories of the guards, ensuring they won't remember any details about Letty and his friends, thus preventing any future pursuit. Reunited with the others, Letty and Diria join the group outside the arena. Diria inquires about their future plans. Steve, inspired by the idea of a new life, turns to the group and suggests they form a traveling circus. The concept excites everyone, and they all joyfully agree in unison. Diria adores the idea of the circus and tells Letty he can stay if he wants. However, Letty declines, saying that while he has learned a lot from them, he isn't sure what role he would play in a circus. He concludes by expressing his newfound confidence in being able to find a place like this for himself and his family. With that decision, they bid a heartfelt goodbye to their new friends and set off on their own path. As they walk away from the circus troupe, Letty turns to Diria and asks what he has been up to in the last 10 days. Diria replies that he has been busy going around to all the local lords, informing them of the many crimes committed by the new Margrave. Letty yawns and tells Diria that, no matter how long he sleeps, he always wakes up tired. Diria replies, suggesting it must be the journey's toll and that Letty should take the day off to rest. Noticing that Letty is sleeping while standing, Diria recommends that he lie down and take a proper nap. Meanwhile, Pip calls out for Diria upon seeing Letty asleep. Since Diria can understand Pip's language, Pip mentions that he wants to play with someone and, since Letty is sleeping, he plans to go out alone. Diria grants him permission, advising him not to stray too far and to return before sundown. During his little escapade, Pip comes across a diminutive figure in tears. Approaching cautiously, Pip steps in front of the weeping man and emits a piercing scream to capture his attention. Noticing Pip's interest, the man introduces himself as Mr. Leprechaun. He recounts how he used to reside in a charming shoe, until a passing hero crushed it and discarded it. Mr. Leprechaun mentions that he and his companions had to scatter to find new homes, but progress has been sluggish. Pip offers his assistance and discloses that his dragon father is also on a quest for a new dwelling. As Leprechaun's companion gathers leaves for their shelter, he starts to wonder where his friend might be. Suddenly, he spots Pip in the distance, carrying Leprechaun as if they were prey, racing toward him. Initially alarmed and losing his composure, he fears Pip intends harm, but soon realizes Pip's intention is to assist them. They both implore him to help them locate a suitable, old shoe to inhabit. Just then, he notices a shoe belonging to one of the heroes. However, the little men worry about the consequences of stealing from the heroes, yet Pip assures them everything will be alright. While the heroes converse, Pip perches on a tree, dropping bugs on them to drive them away as he acquires the shoe. The leprechauns express gratitude for providing them with a home, also thanking the bugs for their assistance. Just then, Letty, who had been searching for Pip, calls out to him. Spotting Letty, Pip tearfully embraces him affectionately. Letty expresses his worry and scolds Diria for allowing Pip to wander off. Diria reassures him, suggesting he's being overly protective, and shares a childhood memory of living in an area frequented by rabid berserkers. Letty is surprised to learn that Diria had a childhood and asks about the origins of elves. Diria explains that most elves reside near a hidden village in the branches of Yggdrasil. They once lived splendidly on the surface until the rise of younger races caused them to withdraw from the mortal world due to uncertainty about how to interact with them. Letty's face lights up with excitement, prompting Diria to inquire about the reason for his giddy grin. Letty explains that he's simply curious about Diria's childhood. As a child, Diria was consumed by a thirst for knowledge, often found lost in the pages of a book. Once, he attempted to create a quiet sanctuary where he could read undisturbed but failed, leading to scolding from the adults who insisted he stay in the nursery. Undeterred, Diria insisted that he had much to learn and desired solitude. Recognizing his hunger for knowledge, the adults entrusted him to the care of a wise serpent named Jorgungrander. Under the guidance of this great serpent, Diria immersed himself in studies. He delved into languages, philosophy, religion, history, biology, geography, astronomy, medicine, and magic. The days spent in the company of Jorgungrander were deeply fulfilling for Diria. One challenge Diria faced was that his house repeatedly collapsed, seemingly due to his master's influence. Despite efforts from grown elves to build him a sturdy house, it only stood for 10 days. When his master enlisted goblins to construct a new one, it didn't even last 2 days. Aware that any reconstruction would likely meet the same fate, Diria made a drastic decision. He asked his master to resurrect him every morning, intending to freeze to death each night rather than risk another collapse. However, his master expressed reluctance, stating she would send him back if she couldn't guarantee his safety. Upon hearing his master's reluctance, Diria resolved to attempt building once more, this time enlisting the aid of the goblins. With determination in his heart, he worked tirelessly to erect a new dwelling, eager to prove that stability was attainable despite past failures. Yet, as he prepared to announce his accomplishment to his master, tragedy struck once more. In a cruel twist of fate, she inadvertently caused the collapse of his newly constructed abode, leaving Diria devastated and disillusioned. Realizing her inadvertent role in the repeated collapses, Diria's master extended a heartfelt apology, acknowledging the pain and frustration she had caused him. In the midst of his despair, the Graya sisters, moved by his plight, offered comfort and solace. Despite their urging for him to return home, Diria steadfastly refused, fearing the ridicule of the adults and expressing a desire to remain by his master's side. Touched by Diria's unwavering loyalty, the grannies resolved to aid him in his quest for stability. Together, they devised a solution that seemed impervious to the forces that had plagued Diria's previous attempts at building a house atop the Great Serpent where earthquakes could not reach and where his master's inadvertent interference would not result in destruction. As time passed, Diria found himself occupying a unique position, bearing the title of Dark Lord in name only. Centuries slipped by unnoticed by mankind, who had long forgotten the tales of the Dark Lord. Diria encounters a dark dragon, Varney, who enthusiastically introduces himself as the Black Dragon from the Onyx Mountains. Varney addresses Diria as the Dark Lord, but Diria's uncertain response frustrates Varney, who expects a more enthusiastic greeting. Varney explains that he's gone to great lengths to meet the Dark Lord and asks if Diria isn't the one he's looking for. Diria thinks to himself that Varney seems like trouble and plans to convince him to leave. Diria tells Varney that he's mistaken and should pay closer attention to the picture he's holding. Varney admits that he can't differentiate between humans and elves, but believes the Dark Lord agency sent him to Diria for a reason. Diria introduces himself and asks if Varney is the dragon with a bounty on his head, known for terrorizing towns. Varney confirms this and explains that he follows rumors to keep people on their toes. Diria asks what Varney wants from him, and Varney requests promo property. Diria redirects him to an estate agent or dwarven artisan, which frustrates Varney. He feels Diria is dismissing him and expects more respect as the Demon Lord. Varney's attitude irritates Diria, who questions his method of requesting help. This prompts Varney to become petulant and childish as he begins crying in a childish manner, trying to make Diria comply. At this moment, Diria's master intercedes, remarking that Diria has brought yet another interesting acquaintance. She instructs Diria to provide Varney with the help he needs, reminding him that, as her apprentice, he should lend a helping hand to those who request it. Diria then agrees to help Varney and his master, then tells Varney to treat Diria well, as there is much for him to learn. Varney assures her of Diria's safety, and they set out on their journey. They arrive at a guild where heroes reside. Diria questions why Varney chose this place, as it is already occupied by heroes, which could pose a problem. Varney explains that he wants a prime estate and, since Diria can't create one, he intends to fight the heroes and take their place. This prompts Diria to ask why Varney sought his help, if his plan was to be aggressive from the start. Diria decides to leave, but Varney reminds him of his master's words, suggesting that leaving would be disobedient to her. Reluctantly, Diria stays to help Varney, and they invade the castle from the front. Varney uses his fire breathing to engage the heroes. However, the heroes are determined not to give up, heal, and counterattack. Diria assists in taking them out, but as the fight continues, the heroes declare that they won't give up, as they are the rulers of the new world. Varney retorts that he will make the rulers his servants, prompting Diria to advise him not to stoop to their level. Varney teaches Diria that fighting is not just about fists but also about hearts. Diria sarcastically suggests they carry on with the charade, if it's so important. Varney tells him not to be a stick in the mud and addresses him in front of the heroes as the Dark Lord. The heroes, shocked, claim they thought the Dark Lord was just a legend and hadn't been seen in centuries. However, they insist it doesn't matter who Varney and Diria are, and attempt to corner them. Diria and Varney swiftly defeat the heroes. During the battle, Varney asks Diria if he is having fun, but Diria replies that he finds no fun in the battle. Varney explains that it is essential to have fun while working. No matter what happens, if one has the most fun, then he is the real winner. These words give Diria a new revelation, and his eyes glow with understanding. The battle ends in victory for Varney and Diria. Diria then teleports the heroes to a church, clearing the area. Diria decides to leave now that the fortress is Varney's new home, but Varney reveals his desire to explore a beachside property. Diria is frustrated, asking what Varney means by next, and why he needs to check multiple houses. Varney explains that he can't settle for just one house, citing the fortress door's lack of durability. Diria is annoyed, feeling that the attacks on the heroes were unnecessary. As they continue their search, they come across a news poster about the Dark Lord's awakening, featuring Diria more prominently than Varney. Varney is jealous and considers sending a letter to claim credit for the attacks. Diria reminds him that they're supposed to be finding a home, not seeking fame. They view various properties, but none meet Varney's standards. He complains that the houses aren't durable enough for a dragon like him. Diria suggests testing different building materials to find something that can withstand a dragon's strength. Varney agrees, and they enlist the heroes' help in their research. Together, they embark on a series of destructive tests, with Diria noting the durability of various materials. After several failed experiments, Diria concludes that it's nearly impossible for a dragon to live in a human home. Diria suggests building a large-scale property designed specifically for non-humans, but Varney refuses, citing his moral code against stealing from others. Varney believes it would be wrong to take something that doesn't belong to him. Diria proposes asking a dwarven builder to construct one, but Varney notes that dwarves hate dragons and are greedy. He thinks they would be unwilling to help. Varney teases Diria, saying he only reads book covers and doesn't really know anything. He implies that Diria's knowledge is superficial. Varney also mentions that he lacks the funds to hire dwarves. He can't afford their services. As they prepare to leave, Varney spots a fortress and asks Diria if it's always been there. Diria checks his map, but it doesn't show the fortress, suggesting it might be newly built. Varney heads towards the fortress, with Diria following. Upon arrival, Varney wrestles the place and requests Diria's backup. Diria points out that Varney doesn't plan to live there, but Varney explains that he wants to create a safe space for non-humans, free from hero harassment. Their conversation turns into an argument, with Varney telling Diria to shut up and fight. Diria becomes angry, labeling Varney a homeless beggar forced into his care. He reminds Varney that he has no right to be rude or arrogant. The heroes observe their quarrel and see an opportunity to strike. However, Diria and Varney turn their attention to the heroes and continue arguing while fighting. Varney questions Diria's lack of motivation to protect anything. prompting Diria to recall his master's words about having much to learn. After the battle, Diria asks Varney about his motivations. Varney explains that he wants a family and a home to call his own as he's getting older. He desires a place to bring women back without worrying about heroes interrupting. Diria questions why Varney came to him for help when there are other options available. Varney believes that only the Dark Lord can succeed him, and Diria laughs at this logic. They decide to continue searching for a home for Varney, which will also give Diria the chance to explore the world. Diria concludes his tale with Letty and Pip, noting that it is late and they should continue another time. Letty, curious, wonders what Varney ended up with. He bets that Varney's house is cool and expresses his hope to find one just as impressive someday. We meet Huey and Albert, two hunters on a new quest. Huey has just completed a job, stealing a dragon egg, and is now camping near the Zarata Mines, a dwarven stronghold. He shares his encounter with a red dragon, which neither attacked nor fled. Intrigued, Huey believes it might be a new species. He and Albert plan to track it down, following its trail to the Temple of Fall. However, upon arrival, they find the dragon's footprints leading away from the temple. Albert suggests looting the temple, but Huey stops him, reminding him that stealing is a crime, unlike their monster hunting jobs. Huey points out that the red dragon has entered the forest of the dead. Albert questions Huey's courage, but Huey admits his fear. Albert reassures him that ghost stories are just myths, but Huey remains uneasy. As they approach the forest's edge, Huey warns Albert about potential poisonous gas and suggests turning back. His fear of the unknown is palpable. Huey and Albert approach a house, armed with a map provided by three grannies, which supposedly leads to the red dragon's lair. They plan to sneak in, but Huey hesitates, feeling uneasy about the situation. He imagines various scenarios, including the dragon's potential presence, and Albert agrees, noting that they can't just barge in without permission. Instead, they decide to observe the house, and soon, they overhear three heroes discussing the lair. The heroes confidently enter the house, and Huey remarks that they might beat them to the punch if they're not careful. Albert points out a window, suggesting they take a peek inside. They then observe that the heroes being beaten up by three monsters, who reveal that the Flame Dragon Lord is absent and busy planning world domination. The monsters boast about their boss's power, claiming he can turn a kingdom to ash with a single breath. Huey and Albert are shocked, realizing the gravity of the situation. Albert asks Huey what their next move should be, and Huey suggests retreating for now, as the dragon isn't present, but they shouldn't take the monster's words lightly. Huey suggests that they gear up before facing the dragon, and head to the guild to spread the word about the Flame Dragon Lord. He requests the guild lady to print posters and send them to every guild in the land, warning of the dragon's threat to the world. She asks for clarification, and Huey explains the dragon's destructive power. Meanwhile, Huey and Albert lie in wait, planning to ambush the dragon. Albert questions their location, but Huey trusts his instincts. Just then, Letty appears but is intercepted by bandits. Huey and Albert observe from a distance as flames engulf the bandits, assuming the dragon is responsible. They postpone their ambush plan, realizing the dragon is enraged. However, it's revealed that Diria used his magical powers to defeat the bandits, prompting Letty's question about his extreme actions. Diria justified his actions, stating that those who demand organs from strangers hardly deserve mercy. He notes that he showed restraint by sparing the bandits' horses and goods, and the other party had retreated. Diria checks the contents of the goods, noting that most of the items are made by companies outside the area, leading him to suspect they are stolen. Foolish, Letty, driven by curiosity, opens one of the boxes and finds a girl inside. He exclaims and informs Diria. Letty questions Diria on what to do with the girl, suggesting she was probably kidnapped. Diria concurs. Letty proposes to go into town to inform the guards, but Diria clarifies that the guards might mistake them for the kidnappers. Instead, Diria suggests teleporting her back to town, and Letty agrees. As Diria prepares to wake the girl to ask for her address, Letty requests he first hide. However, the girl wakes up at that moment, freaks out at the sight of Letty, then calms down and introduces herself. She asks Letty if he kidnapped her, but Diria clarifies that it was the roasted bandit who had done the kidnapping. He explains that Letty is a sweet, kind, gentle, half-witted coward and a dragon unable to fly, so he wouldn't have the heart to kidnap anyone. The girl decides to trust Diria and Letty but refuses. Diria offers to teleport her home, but she requests a safe place to hide instead, explaining that she had run away and needs a place where her pursuers won't find her. Diria offers a solution and asks what she wants in her ideal hideout. She requests an absurdly luxurious home, which Diria surprisingly provides by teleporting her to a 3-bedroom cave with a bath. However, the girl remains unimpressed, demanding more. Letty points out her spoiled behavior, and she insults him. Diria tries to fulfill her wishes again, but she criticizes his bath-making skills. As she speaks, she accidentally slips and falls off the cliff. Letty foolishly jumps to save her, but his lack of wisdom leads to both of them falling into the water. After a series of experiences trying to find an ideal bath, Letty is forced to help prepare one for the princess. She complains that she's been dragged around, only to be prepared like stew in a dragon's cooking pot. Letty tries to reassure her, saying he's only trying to help and that she should be nicer. He explains that the cookpot is all they have, and he's doing this because she wanted a bath. While she is bathing, Letty asks why she ran away. She gives a foolish reason, stating that her father ate her cupcakes without asking permission. Letty advises her to forgive him, but she insists that her father needs to reflect on what he has done, calling him a big buffoon. Letty then warns her that it's dangerous for a young girl like her to travel alone, especially since she has already been kidnapped once. However, she remains adamant, saying that she merely let her guard down. Letty reminds her that if Diria hadn't been there to help, she might have been in worse trouble. She acknowledges this, reluctantly thanking Letty for saving her, and admitting that while he might be a half-wit dragon, he is kind, and she is glad he found her. She then asks about the elf's whereabouts, and Letty mentions that he probably took a walk. Suddenly, heroes appear and address Letty as the Great Flame Dragon. Seeing the princess, they mistakenly believe Letty is cooking her and approach to save her. The princess tells them to buzz off, clarifying that she left home of her own will. The heroes accuse Letty of brainwashing her, and as they are about to engage, Diria arrives just in time to stop them. Afterward, the princess asks what Diria intends to do with her. He replies that he has no plans and suggests she shouldn't address him so formally. He would like her to return home but won't force her. Until she's ready to go back, she can travel with them. She then tells Letty to call her Nell, and their adventure continues. The next morning, Nell seems to be glowing, and Diria compliments her as he fixes her hair, noting how good she looks. However, Nell notices that Letty appears stressed, and asks what's wrong. Diria explains that he gave Letty the chance to choose where they would scout next for his home, and Letty is having difficulties selecting a location. Letty mentions that he usually lets Diria handle everything and decides to leave it to luck. This amuses Nell, who tells him to be a good role model since he is a father. Suddenly, Nashim arrives, startling Letty, who passes out. When Letty wakes up, Nashim introduces himself as a tax counselor from the Non-Human Internal Revenue Service, there to discuss some unpaid taxes. Nashim explains that since Letty is no longer with his family, he is no longer a dependent and must start paying taxes. Confused, Letty doesn't understand what is happening and refers to it as magic. Nell clarifies that it's not magic and explains that a portion of their income goes to the government, which is what taxes are. She adds that Letty now needs to report his earnings, so they can calculate how much he owes. Nashim further explains that when a member of a high-ranking species becomes independent, they must file a yearly income tax report, and they haven't received Letty's yet. Letty remains confused, so Nell elaborates that taxes are the government's share of their income, and he needs to declare his earnings for the calculation. Nashim mentions that the Demon Lord makes it possible for non-humans to live peacefully, and taxes are their way of contributing. At this moment, Diria's activity catches Nashim's attention, and he becomes flustered upon seeing Diria. However, Diria asks Nashim to continue with his work. Nashim then warns Letty that he doesn't want to commit tax evasion, as it is a crime, and Letty agrees to follow Nashim to handle the issue. Letty and Nashim go to the tax service location, where Nashim assists Letty with his tax filing. He gives Letty a form to fill out, to figure out his stats, and Letty mentions that he is currently looking for a house and is unemployed. Nell adds that he is also fostering a child, and the genie man notes that this means Letty hasn't earned anything since leaving his family. Letty clarifies that he has done a few side jobs, and Nashim asks for Letty's cards to verify his information. After checking, Nashim says he will get back to him. Nell, intrigued, asks to see Letty's card, but Letty refuses. Persistent, Nell eventually gets her way and sees the card. She is disappointed and questions if Letty is truly a dragon, as his stats are very low. Pip also wants to see the card, but Nell warns that it would be heartbreaking for him. She describes her father's stats as incredible, but Pip insists on seeing it, prompting Nell to tell Letty to handle the rest and then runs away from the situation. Letty is left confused about how to handle it. Nashim returns with a few documents and asks if Letty is okay. Nashim suggests that Letty should consider applying for a child allowance, explaining that it is a sum of money given to assist with child-rearing expenses. Noting that Letty has 2 dependents, Letty corrects him, saying Nell is not his child and that she is human. Nashim, hearing this, jokes that Letty is saving her for later, but Letty assures him he isn't eating her either. Letty signs the last form, and Nashim tells him to pay his taxes when he finds a home. Diria reminds Letty about the house he built and tells him to declare it. Letty informs Nashim that he had built a house but gave it to someone else. Hearing this, Nashim mentions that they will have to run a capital deduction, but Letty is clueless about what this means. Diria provides all the necessary contracts to settle everything, and Letty becomes overwhelmed by the whole situation and passes out. Pip wakes his father up, and Nell suggests that Pip should choose the next home to tour. Letty then thanks Nell and Pip for helping out. The next house they plan to tour is in Nell's city, which shocks her. They finally arrive in the human city, and Nell becomes paranoid, fearing she might be recognized. Diria reassures her, saying no one would suspect them, and they proceed to the next house to explore. Nell yells that it's a place meant for training heroes, and Letty should recognize it. Diria explains that the kingdom commissioned dwarves to build this dungeon to train heroes, employing non-humans to act as dungeon enemies. If Letty wants to stay, he has to work there. Letty worries about being seen by humans, but Diria informs him that the training ground is currently closed. Nell volunteers to lead the dungeon exploration, being familiar with it. She runs ahead with Pip, while Letty follows, surprised to find the dungeon is spacious enough for him. Nell suggests starting with the side paths, explaining they usually contain treasure boxes, unlike the main path. She asks if Letty's parents' house had treasure chests, but he says no, they kept things in drawers. Nell feels down, but Diria encourages her, explaining the dungeon she knows is run by humans. Diria tells them to continue their tour as they head toward the employee quarters. Letty notices the dungeon music playing in the background, which changes as they move to different areas, encountering various monsters. Progress is slow, so Letty asks Diria for a hint. Suddenly, a voice tells Letty to keep moving straight. Diria explains it's the dungeon's magic, guiding lost hero trainees. The voice in Letty's head continues, giving more instructions, which becomes annoying. After walking a long distance, they reach a large door. Diria explains that it leads to the boss's lair and the employee living quarters beyond it. Hearing this, Letty sighs with relief, but can't open the door. Diria then says they need to gather all the pieces of the stone relief to open it. Frustrated, Nell insists it was easy getting there, and Letty starts thinking he's seen the necessary pieces somewhere. Diria praises his observation, noting the dungeon was crafted by the same artisan who built the Temple of Fall. They search around, and Nell spots something shiny that might be the key. As soon as Letty picks it up, the room starts closing in. He tries to put it back, but it's stuck in his satchel. Pip then spots a secret room, and they all run into it, narrowly escaping danger. In the secret room, they find a ladder. Letty asks where it leads, but Nell says they'll have to find out. Climbing up the ladder, they end up in the royal palace, and Nell can't help but feel disturbed. The narrator recounts the tale of a terrible dragon, known as the Flame Dragon Lord, who once wielded hellfire and could burn entire kingdoms to ash in a single night. Many heroes fell by his hand, and he was a force to be reckoned with. One day, the king, searching for his missing princess, left the castle defenseless. The Flame Dragon Lord appeared, holding the princess hostage. Back to the present, we see the king, who has ordered his army to surround the palace. He addresses Letty as the Great Flame Dragon and demands he surrender the princess, threatening an attack if he refuses. Letty, frightened, asks Diria how they ended up in this situation. Diria explains that Letty, after navigating the labyrinth and entering the castle, panicked and tried to flee, only to run into the heroes again. He dealt with the heroes, leading the king to believe he had taken the princess, enraging him and resulting in their current predicament. Diria mentions that the king truly believes Letty kidnapped Nell. Letty suggests that Nell tell her father the truth, but Nell refuses, reminding Letty that her father insulted her. She insists she won't speak to him until he apologizes. Letty asks if Diria can use magic to help them escape, but Diria explains that the area is warded against teleportation magic to prevent intruders. Letty then suggests returning to the sewers, but Nell reminds him they got lost there before. Diria then suggests they defend themselves. They start by sealing off the outer gates and dealing with the guards, with Pip's help. Letty worries about whether they're doing the right thing. Diria assures him that the only remaining threat is the drawbridge, but the royal army has likely crossed it already, so there's no need to worry. Letty panics, fearing the army is coming for him. Diria explains that the castle is surrounded by a moat with only one access point, which restricts the flow of enemy combatants. Their 3 layers of defense should be sufficient. Diria suggests they move to their counterattack point, but Letty holds Nell back, telling her to stay in the castle since they'll be fighting her father. Nell insists she can't abandon her friends in trouble and won't forgive herself if she does. Letty, touched by Nell calling him a friend, decides to do something for all his friends. Diria outlines their defense plan, but Nell points out they lack archers. She suggests Letty breathe fire, but being the useless dragon that he is, he says his tongue can't handle the heat. Diria mentions he called in reinforcements, the gnomes, who will pelt the enemies with rocks. As the gnomes begin their attack, one of the soldiers updates the king, stating that the reinforcements are hindering their progress, and they haven't spotted the flame dragon. The king plans to infiltrate the castle through a secret passage, but is stopped by his guards, who warn of potential threats within the walls beside the dragon. The king asks if anyone has seen the dragon, and one soldier says they spotted him peeking through a trapdoor before running away in panic. The king is furious, feeling mocked by the dragon. Meanwhile, Diria tells Letty he was supposed to ambush the army from the trapdoor, but ran off when spotted. Nell believes her father will withdraw soon, and they just need to wait a little longer. However, the battle continues throughout the day, and the enemy makes progress through the defenses. With the last defense remaining, Nell wonders where the gnomes went, noting that their disappearance led to losing defensive ground. Diria points out they still have the portcullis, which they use to trap some of the armies. The soldiers start using ladders to climb the walls, and Diria laments the lack of archers. The king arrives and demands the flame dragon release his daughter, promising to spare him if she is unharmed. If there's a single scratch on her, he threatens to flay the dragon's hide and drape it across the castle gates, declaring his daughter as the most precious thing to him. Hearing these words, Nell is moved to tears. Letty suggests they retreat into the castle and asks Nell to lead the way. Diria warns that they will be quickly discovered if they hide there, prompting Letty to urge Diria to come up with a solution. The army finally infiltrates the castle, as the king orders his soldiers to search every nook and cranny. During the search, the king spots Letty and chases after him, but Letty leads him to a room where the door magically seals shut. Inside, the king sees his daughter and immediately hugs her, asking about her well-being. She assures him that she is fine and was treated well. The king, relieved, goes on his knees and begs his daughter for forgiveness. Meanwhile, Letty and Diria lay low in the background. Letty thanks Diria for casting the spell on the doors. Diria expresses his admiration for Letty's bravery in using himself as a decoy to lure the king. Letty explains that he wanted Nell to reconcile with her father, as he sensed they both wanted to make amends. Letty reflects on his own feelings of abandonment after being kicked out of his home, but seeing Nell and her father reconnect, he begins to wonder if his own father had a reason for sending him away. Diria is impressed by Letty's introspection and reassures him. Letty's tears draw the king's attention, and the king, feeling concerned, tells Nell to stay back. But Nell stops her father and explains everything to him. They sit and talk, and the king apologizes to Letty for the misunderstanding that caused him so much trouble. Letty, in turn, apologizes for involving Nell in the mess. He expresses relief that the king listened to him, as the heroes would have attacked him otherwise. The king acknowledges that heroes can be a different breed and that all races have both good and evil among them, including humans. The king then asks about Letty's plans to live and work in the man-made dungeon. Letty, feeling overwhelmed by all the commotion, says he will look for another place. Nell immediately says she wants to come too, but the king reminds her of her royal obligations. Letty then asks how he can escape since the king's soldiers are ready to skin him alive. The king hands him a fairy dust, stating that it will allow them to fly away, and that he will handle the situation on his end. Diria and the king discuss the situation further, with Diria apologizing. The king, surprised to learn his daughter was traveling with the demon king himself, accepts the apology. Diria also provides the king with a list of things that require maintenance in the castle. Letty and Nell share a heartfelt goodbye, and Nell hands him half of a fairy stone, saying that when things calm down, they should find their way to each other. Letty and Diria then use the fairy dust and begin to fly away. Nell warns Letty to ensure they land before the dust wears off. While flying, Letty reminisces about his time with his father when he last flew, saying, "Flying is fun." He talks with Diria, remarking on how fascinating the world is, causing Diria to smile as he recalls his own memories. The scene ends with the narrator mentioning that the flame dragon lord vanished as suddenly as he appeared, his heart stolen by the princess's unrivaled beauty. According to the legend passed down in the capital, the flame dragon lord vowed never to attack the city his beloved cherished.